The BC Forest Service, which is entrusted with managing wildfires in the province, was founded in 1912 and is the predecessor of the current BC Wildfire Service. In the early years, forest rangers both managed forests and fought forest fires. Initially, in the Powell River area, they did their job on foot, on horseback, and by boat. Fighting potential fires has always been a prime concern in this area, and when the Powell River Company planned its town site, one of the main reasons why the buildings were spread out with gaps in between them was to enable firefighters to confine burning buildings. This strategy provides no assistance, however, when wildfires burn out of control. The most destructive local fire was the Great Fire of March 31st, 1918. This fire started near Sarah Point and spread through the woods into Slyamen, leveling the village of Tishosum, destroying virtually all of the homes. Thankfully, no lives were lost in the blaze, as the common residents found safety on the ocean in canoes and by wading out into the water in the bay. In the 1920s, there were many wildfires in the area. One occasion, an out-of-control bushfire burned down houses in the Lang Bay area south of town, and another burned an entire block in Cranberry. Then, in 1938, there was a massive wildfire south of Lund that burned from early July until the end of September. To contain this fire, 150 men served as volunteer firefighters, and they had no access to water. They eventually contained it by clearing fire breaks in the woods. In these years, about 80% of both structural and wildfires in British Columbia were caused by human negligence. The main causes were sparks from chimneys, overheated stoves, fires started by cigarettes, electrical fires, and fires started by children who were playing with matches. Another common cause of fire was the careless disposal of ashes from people's fireplaces and stoves that caused many bushfires and house fires. During the 20s, logging practices involved clear-cutting and slash-burning the fibrous waste, which caused some of the worst wildfires. However, logging only caused about 5% of all forest fires. Despite the fact that loggers worked in very hazardous conditions with risks to causing fires, they invested a lot of time in firefighting, and they had on hand a lot of equipment to put out fires, and they successfully were able to put out most of the small bushfires on their own before they got out of control. The Powell River Company set up its own fire department at the mill to protect both the mill and the town site. The mill worked hard to prevent fires in their facilities, and in 1920 it appointed a full-time fire chief and 4 firemen who served to drive fire trucks. The mill worked hard to reduce the risk of fire conditions in its operations. The fire department was also supplied with brand new fire trucks and staffed with an additional crew of 10 volunteer firefighters. The mill's fire brigade, however, didn't just protect the mill. It also fought fires, including bushfires, beyond town site. In 1924, there were 21 different fires that the brigade put out in the town site area. 5 of these had been caused by cigarette smoking. Another 5 had been caused by children playing with matches. Other causes were chimney and stove fires, fires caused by welding, and electrical appliances. So, the question is, what equipment did ordinary people have at the time to put out fires? In 1929, an ad ran in the local Powell River newspaper explaining how to make your own fire extinguisher at home. They suggested to mix 10 pounds of salt with 5 pounds of salt ammoniac and 5 gallons of water. The recommendation was to keep this mixture bottled up and on hand to put out small fires before they got out of control. Bill Black was one of the first and longest serving forest rangers in the Powell River area, serving this forest region from 1927 until 1955. According to Bill, the major causes of wildfires in those years were campfires and cigarettes. The Powell River Ranger District covered 11,000 square kilometers along the coast north of Jervis Inlet, and fire protection was one of the main duties of the forest rangers. They recommended that campfires be made below the high tide mark, noting that campfires were the single greatest source of bushfires. As well, local fire wardens prohibited slash birding, the practice of clearing land of fibrous debris by burning it, between the months of May and October 1st. And people could only slash burn in the wet season with a permit. Those failing to respect the closure would be prosecuted under the Forest Fire Law of 1936. Under this act, all able-bodied citizens were also required to assist in fighting forest fires and were financially liable for refusing to do so. What were the slash burns like? In September 1937, a logging camp on Theodosia Arm made a controlled slash burn that sent plumes of black smoke far and wide, making it all the way down to the shingle mill in Mowat Bay on Powell Lake. The smoke caused widespread panic and false alarms that a wildfire was burning out of control. During the Great Depression, there was a shortage of funds for fighting wildfires. In 1932, when a fire broke out on Texada, just opposite Lang Bay, the Forest Service, with its stretched resources, was unable to respond and prevent the fire from burning, which it did unchecked for weeks. When the forest rangers were able to respond, they usually were able to keep wildfires under control. In 1936, a large wildfire broke out near Haslam Lake. A member of the public called in the fire, and Bill Black organized a crew of men who worked round the clock to contain it. Fighting wildfires was not easy in those years. In 1938, District Fire Ranger Bill Black reported that on an island on Haslam Lake, some campers built a campfire and left the island before ensuring that all of the ashes were out, and then ended up burning down all of the trees on the island. These sort of fires were all too common. In 1937, firefighters were called to a bushfire near town site that had been caused by two toddlers who were playing with a box of matches. As a result of these risks, volunteer fire departments were set up in Cranberry Lake and in Westview in 1938. Westview had a population of about 2,000, and it purchased its own fire truck for its volunteer fire brigade a few years later. In 1943, Wildwood residents created their own fire brigade. These fire departments would put out bushfires within their own jurisdictions if they were able to do so, a common practice that continues to the present day. In 1955, the Powell River Municipal Fire Department was created with a merger of the 4 fire departments in Townsite, Westview, Cranberry, and Wildwood. Although the municipal fire department's focus is on structural fires, they also respond to bushfires within the municipality. During the 50s, there was also an improvement in the response to wildfires. Each logging camp had its own fire warden, who carefully monitored things during the summer, when the risk for wildfire is highest. The wardens would check the weather, humidity, as dry conditions increase the fire hazard. The warden would also monitor the fire equipment, such as shovels and fire extinguishers. Not every year it was bad for hazardous conditions for wildfires, but there were bad fire years in 1951 and 1958 in the Powell River region. As well, in the 50s, air tankers began to be commonly used for water bombing, both by the Canadian government and by private logging companies, assisting in putting out and containing wildfires. In the late 60s, volunteer fire departments were set up in the rural areas north and south of town. The Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department was set up south of town in 1967, and the Clahuman Nation and Northside Fire Departments were set up in 1968 north of town. Like their municipal counterparts, their focus was on structural fires and bushfires within their jurisdictions. In 1994, the Ministry of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations created the Wildfire Branch, separate from others who are specialized in forest management. Since that time, the BC Wildfire Service has had year-round staff dedicated to fighting wildfires. What is it like to fight wildfires? Wildfire Officer Jeff Belcher explained that fighting wildfires is hard work, as crews may spend 10 days at a time fighting fires for 14 hours a day. Many fires are quite tame, where crews are digging up smoldering ground of small fires around smoking trees. Sometimes, though, they can be anything but tame, where crews can face 30-foot walls of flame, giving off intense heat and choking amounts of smoke. Today, logging practices are much more attentive to mitigating the risks of wildfires, making the land less volatile. Though at the same time, in recent years, due to climatic changes, the summers have been longer and hotter, increasing the risk of wildfires. Nowadays, about half of all wildfires in BC are caused by human factors, such as campfires, cigarettes, and careless backyard burning, a slight improvement when compared to the early years of the 20th century. Some of the best strategies to prevent wildfires include being responsible with campfires, following burning regulations for backyard burning, and reporting wildfires with as much detail as possible. Powell River's local fire zone is the Sunshine Coast Fire Zone, which includes the Sunshine Coast Regional District, the Cafet Regional District, and parts of the Strathcona Regional District. In the summer, there is a 4-person crew in Powell River, as well as a 3-person initial attack crew based in Sechelt. There are interagency agreements between the Wildfire Service and local Powell River City Fire Department, the Clahaman Nation Fire Department, and the volunteer fire departments south of town, north of town, in Venanda and Gillies Bay, on Texada, on Savory Island, and on Lasqueti Island. Most wildfires are in fact detected by Good Samaritans. To report a wildfire, either phone *5555 or 1-800-663-5555.